Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the COVID-19 Frontlines, Non-Healthcare Alums Fight Back. We got a panel of great alumni, and we'll just get started. We'll give it a minute or so just to have everyone come in before we get started. And as always, if you have any questions, Q&A, please submit it in the Q&A box. So we'll give it a few more minutes and then we'll get started. And welcome to all of our Facebook audience as well, for those of you who are tuning in live from there. We'll start exactly at 12:03. All right. I know we'll continuously have people join in, and a hello again to all of the folks tuning in from the Facebook live stream. We got tons of great content coming up, and as all of you know, the MIT Club of Northern California have been hosting all of our events online. For those of you who are looking for even more events to join, if you just go onto our website, which here we're showing, it's mitcnc.org, and you can go through an events page to see all of our upcoming amazing events. And for today, we are very honored to have 3 awesome alums speak about their efforts for COVID-19 relief. And so basically, the part of the reason that we started this session, this is the 3rd event in the series, is that we were really excited to see all the different things that alums were doing from different angles. We also heard from alums who were not in the medical field, specifically who are doctors or medical researchers, feeling frustrated in the beginning for how can they give back as well. So the inspiration behind this particular series is to highlight the great things that alums are doing from all different courses, and to help inspire other alums who are thinking also about how to give back in different ways. So I'd like to, without further ado, I'd like to go in the order that we have here, with Stephanie going first, followed by Sue Lee, and then Noelle, to talk a little bit about what you are working on and how you got started.
All right, I'm going to share my screen if that's all right.
Absolutely.
All right, is this displaying okay? Awesome. Just good to give you guys a little visual stimulation while I discuss a couple of things I'm working on. Thanks for having me. So my name is Stephanie Whalen. I graduated in 2012 from the Course 2 Mechanical Engineering Department. Since then, I've specialized in product development. A lot of my work has been in medical device and consumer electronics. So I'm not directly in the hospital most of the time or doing anything quite like I'm working with the devices that will go to doctors or everyday people. So when the coronavirus pandemic started hitting, I was basically, if you had a lot of stuff in place, like manufacturing, for example, you're able to switch over very quickly. But I wanted to basically help our domestic teams here when the transport from China was getting shut off, to get more resources here and locally. So I started talking to people basically and saying, this is the problem I want to help with. What are people working on? And a couple projects that I've found myself contributing a lot to are the Open Standard Respirator program and adaptive medical systems. So I have these kind of slides up here for you guys to see visually. The Open Standard Respirator is a reusable elastomeric respirator. So respirator is different from a mask in that the respirator helps with incoming particles as well as exhaled particles, whereas a mask is mostly for source control. Most of the industrial respirators on the market they have exhale valves to make it easier to breathe. So this is an N95 here, for example, that has this little valve here that releases the air you breathe out right back into the environment. So the ideal scenario is that you have like bidirectional filtration. And the team that I started working with, I know we're going to talk more about a little bit later, so I'm not going to go into details of how I found my team, but it's a lot of, we have from professors, we have a lot of mechanical engineers, people who specialize in injection molding, a lot of partners with the different people who make the different parts. So I can go into more detail later, but that's the overview of what we're doing and where we are. We have prototypes, we're making molds and looking to get these into the hands of people as soon as possible. There's definitely regulatory things that we are working through as well to make sure that things are both safe and kosher before they are going into the hands of anybody who could be exposed and have it be dangerous. Adaptive medical systems is focusing on the surge capacity problem. So a lot of the hospitals being overloaded, people intubating patients in waiting rooms are really the problems that we're looking to solve by having a system that can deploy quickly and be taken down and moved around with the supply chains in mind to have all the equipment necessary, all the medications necessary, staffing solutions, that sort of thing. So we're working with like all the data that's and where the different spikes are happening, trying to figure out where is best to provide this kind of support. And if there's any way we can nimbly adapt existing shelter technologies to provide very specific coronavirus helpful features that make it more specifically helpful to COVID patients instead of just being a generic field hospital.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for that quick overview. Next, we'll go to Celie. And for those of you who are just joining us a little later than we started, welcome. If you do have any Q&A, please do not enter it in the chat box. Please enter it in the Q&A box, and then I will be able to help bring those up as appropriate throughout the session. All right, so next we go to Celie. What is your background and what is your project on for COVID-19?
Thanks, Wendy, for having me. So I'm calling in from Rhode Island, and just a little bit about my background. So I grew up with stories of hardship and help. My parents arrived in Europe in the 60s with nothing but 2 suitcases and the clothes on their back. And it was really other people's generosity and goodwill that helped them to navigate their new home. So I grew up half in Europe and half in Vancouver. And I thought that, I wanted to go into the medical profession because I wanted to help people. And that was part of the reason that I was attracted to MIT, because, the institution definitely made a point when they were trying to get me to apply to that it was an institution around bettering the condition of mankind. So life happened and I did not become a doctor, but I also realized that you don't have to be a doctor to help people. So I ended up in Rhode Island. I have 2 beautiful children here, and I've helped primarily funded companies to scale and very large companies to transform using technology. So I most recently started this job at Rhode Island Commerce, and then the pandemic hit. We have a small business hotline that had an influx of volume, like 20-fold what it could hold, what it used to have. And so it was all hands on deck for us to help our small businesses in Rhode Island, the backbone of our society, the laundromats and the hair salons, the restaurants and the auto shops. They were all really struggling. And so what we found is that some portion of those calls were people that had never worked from home, trying to figure that out. Some people didn't have internet access at home, accessibility issues. And then there were people who had don't have their files in the cloud, and we're trying to access their files, all the way to, you know, I need to find new sources of revenue. I want to start using Shopify, and I don't know this thing called Google My Business, or I want to do Zoom therapy. So what we did is, in a matter of like 48 hours, we stood up a Genius Bar like office hour program that runs from Monday to Friday in the afternoons, and has all kinds of the whole IT tech ecosystem in Rhode Island came and volunteered their time and to give these 45-minute free sessions, and over 300 small businesses have had the chance to take advantage of these sessions, some of them multiple, and we've really started to transform the small businesses here. We've implemented about 2 or 3 other programs just from learning from that first program, and I'm happy to talk about those as well. I don't want to take all the airtime.
Thank you, Celia. We'll definitely get back to questions on some of the challenges and what your workarounds are a little bit later. All right, Noelle.
Hi, thank you so much. Honored to be here, and wonderful to hear more about what Suli and Steph are working on. It's really incredible and inspiring. I'm also from Vancouver, British Columbia. My background, I'm originally from British Columbia and then worked in New York City in local economic development and public service, and came to MIT to study urban planning. So I was in course 11 and graduated in 2017. While I was at MIT, I started a project called Nesterly, and this was a solution to address the really housing crisis that we're seeing in cities across the US and around the world, where over half of all renters before COVID-19 were struggling to pay rent and paying too much money in rent. And at the same time, we have a rapidly aging population, and the fastest growing urban population in cities across the US are older adults, which I think was really underreported. And as a public servant, I didn't actually know a lot about this, that this was such a big shift that was happening. So Nesterly helps address those 2 challenges through intergenerational home sharing. And we actually got started just 2 weeks after I graduated from MIT. We had a partnership with the Innovation Lab at the City of Boston. And when COVID hit, we were thinking about how we respond with the intergenerational housing solution that we were bringing. It seemed like a difficult time to really push that forward in the immediate aftermath of COVID. But we had a regular call with the City of Boston every 2 weeks, and they came to us and said, we have all these seniors calling the Elderly Affairs Commission saying that we have needs. They need groceries, they need masks, and then they had hundreds of city staff that were actually offering to go and help and take care of those needs, but they didn't have a great way to match people, and asked us if they could use the Nesterly platform to do that, because our platform was kind of matching seniors to things that, to opportunities that they needed, help around the house, finding the right home share companion, and this extra income. So we didn't use the Nesterly platform, but we basically created a whole new service called Good Neighbors. We launched it in partnership with the City of Boston, with the mayor, and now in the first couple days of launching, we had 500 volunteers sign up, and the mayor announced it, and then over the weekend, just every minute we had new volunteers, and we're now at about 900 volunteers. And we're completing, we offer deliveries. 95% of the requests coming in are for deliveries for seniors and people that have compromised immune systems. But we also offer phone calls and letter writing for social support. So I can go into a little bit more detail later, but that's that's the basics on Good Neighbors. And delighted to be here and looking forward to digging in more.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's so wonderful to hear what you are all doing. And it's very multifaceted, right? I mean, we all know for COVID-19 is not just about the virus and the treatment of the virus. That's a big part of it. But, you know, what comes along with it, with the, you know, different ways to actually get protective gear, to all these small businesses that are struggling and how to help them, to also making sure that, you know, the elderly and those who are more compromised. I just love hearing this, and this is just, I feel so honored to be here. So, you know, on that note, you know, there are so many different ways to help. There's so many ways to go about mitigating the different problems that do arise. And so how did you choose the specific project that you're working on? I'm sure there were lots of different things that you could have done, but what made you decide on what you're doing now? So we'll go in the same order again, starting with Steph, and then Suli, and then Noel.
So for the Open Standard Respirator project, I am really lucky to have found the group that I'm working with on this. But it all started when basically we had the PPE shortage, and there's posts everywhere about people 3D printing PPE and without manufacturing or medical experience. And just, you know, you're a savior with a 3D printer and can do anything, right? That's the dream that 3D printers have been sold on. And 3D printers are great, and I use them all the time. They have really made product development a much faster and more effective process. However, there's a lot of limitations to them. Not everyone has the same limitations, but the big one is that not having, like, converging on designs and just having all these files everywhere that people are printing, and hospitals getting them in and being like, I don't know if I can use this. Like, we don't know where this came from or if it's safe for people to use. And in that, even in the calculation of how much can you produce on a 3D printer in one day, I was just like running rough numbers and having arguments with people online of like, hey, look, if all of us who are going to go out and buy a 3D printer in this group, if that's what you're proposing, just put that money towards making an injection mold that can pump out parts this fast, like, you could make so much more of a difference. So I started being like, okay, I should put my money where my mouth is and start like figuring out what it would take to get something molded, if that's like truly the limitation is having, you know, locally produced supplies. And when I contacted, said, oh, I know someone else who's working on something like that, let me connect you. So the Helpful Engineering Group is a big Slack channel and open source community for hardware. And a lot of the people who talk about the 3D printing and stuff are on there as well. But there's a group of us that formed with product development, mechanical engineering expertise, to work on this open source reusable elastomeric respirator. So I was able to connect with some really great folks that like none of us had ever met before. Maybe a couple people had brought in some friends of theirs, but we have this like really strong core team now. It's really fun to work with them. I'm really like, it's really great to have such an awesome team. So we have people from universities who have like hospitals there who can like ask them for feedback and get like good answers on how they would use this. That was anyway, this is basically how I landed in that particular project. The other was the Adaptive Medical Systems project. I connected with Jessica, who's been running this entire program. We got introduced via friends of friends. As I was saying, I'm looking for ways to help out who's looking for help. And that's my big advice for people who are looking to help out. Just like keep saying what your intention is and what you want to be working on, because then the people who, you know, hear those things on each side of like, I need help and I'm looking to help, can help connect you with the right people.
I love that. And it's kind of, you reached out. And what was the community again on Slack for the hardware engineers?
Helpful Engineering. And Helpful Engineering is not just hardware people. And we call on people, like we find people through that network who have, for example, quality and regulatory affairs folks, people who have technical writing skills who can help write instructions for use, people who can do graphic design and helping make like contact tracing apps. Like there's everything on there too. So it's not just engineering hardware.
I love it. It's like you design your own role within this. All right, Suli.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. So how did I decide on the COVID-19 contribution? So necessity is the mother of invention. And I think I was just in the right place at the right time with a background. And like Stephanie, had the opportunity to use that to create amazing partnerships and teams, to do some amazing things for the community. So out of those thousands of calls that we took, we found that the people that were taking those calls obviously didn't have a technology background, even though the help that people needed had to do with technology. So there were a couple of us that understood that network in Rhode Island, and we reached out for partnership, and everyone wanted to help. So it was then a matter of finding a platform, and we have an amazing partnership with District Hall Providence, which actually is started as the Venture Cafe Foundation, which is also an MIT alum startup with CIC. And so District Hall Providence is our producing partner, and we have, tons of volunteers from the tech ecosystem, over 50 companies right now, and we're able to help hundreds of sessions. We're able to have hundreds of sessions a week. I would say, yep, same as Stephanie, like you are marrying what you're hearing people need help on. Keep your ears open. I also knew that I could stand up a support function, since I have helped companies scale and build departments. So I was able to stand up process and templates and forms and all that really quickly. And then the partnerships, getting the right team together and making sure that everyone has kind of clear roles, and we have a common goal. We took our first session was a salon, and we took that in 48 hours. It was really, it was satisfying to be able to help someone so quickly. So, yeah.
So it sounds like you did a lot of just kind of trying out new ideas, seeing if that worked, inviting the community and the different partnerships to come on board.
So yeah, I just want to maybe take what Stephanie is taken and say, continue to experiment too. So we stood up this Genius Bar's office hour session. It's working great. What we realized is some people don't know where to start. So now we do these concierge calls. I call them like mini management consulting calls, that help people kind of take a deep breath, because we find that many of these small businesses need a little mental health break too. So, sometimes we spend half the call just listening and being a person to listen. And I think that's a real gift. And then, again, I'm just so grateful to be a part of an organization that is able to give that to the community. So we do these concierge calls, we call them now. We have the 45-minute sessions, which could be with like a PHP programmer or, a Google My Business expert. And then we also did a websites in a week program, which sounds snazzy, but really what it was is find an additional source of revenue in a week and a half and try it, test it. So it was like a test to help small businesses test, and kind of like in a support group. And we had 5 businesses, and they all found ways to take orders in new ways. And so I'm really excited about making that a longer term project. We also had a laptop loan project, because we realized a lot of folks didn't have laptops, or they had broken laptops and they needed to apply for their PPP or start Zoom classes, and they'd never used Zoom before. And then we actually have 1,000 laptop donation from Microsoft that we're now giving out to small businesses. So half of those. So it's, it starts to get, legs in ways that we've now built these beautiful partnerships and community around deploying. So there's so much more to do, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's great. And sounds like you definitely have made a lot of impact on many of the small businesses in Rhode Island. And Noelle, what about you? What, how did you decide on the areas that you focused on,
Mhm. Yeah, so I'd say piggybacking on what Suli and Stephanie said, we kind of had this original, this very early call with our partners at the city, from the Innovation Lab and from the group that the Elderly Affairs Commission basically, and they just sort of hinted at this idea and we ran with it. They didn't give us confirmation that they would, be behind this or that the mayor would announce it or anything. They just said, do you think this would be possible? And we just went straight to work. We're a small team, but we have a couple of engineers. We started looking at like what best practices were already out there, like who was doing delivery services really well, what had they already learned that we could build off of. And we just sort of went out on a limb. We didn't know and just started building. We didn't know if it would get adopted. We didn't know if the city would definitely work with us and promote it and partner. And we still don't have a contract with them, but we believe that they will. And basically, by doing that, it was kind of a trial and error. Like we had finished kind of first prototype of what it would look like, and then we found out from the city that there was a top-down decision that all volunteers that they referred would have to have background checks done. So then we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to incorporate background checks into this process that we developed? It seemed like a drag that we had to do that, and an extra step. But now that we're talking to other people and looking at, now that we've built this tool, it's working really well. We're thinking about how do we share it with other cities. So we're starting to talk to other cities and other communities like food banks and food distribution hubs that kind of have this issue and challenge of the last mile delivery. Before COVID, they had this challenge, but now it's obviously exacerbated, and background checks are really critical for all of these partners, for people that serve seniors, for food banks, for cities. So it was actually really good that we incorporated this into the original idea. But the other piece that was kind of, in terms of advice, that was interesting is thinking about how you fit into the ecosystem. So when when the city first told us this is the challenge that we're having, we're like, oh, there's this rise in all these mutual aid movements. And there's, they were a really inspiring group and a really inspiring story and doing something similar. But we tried to figure out kind of what challenges they were having by talking to those groups, and seeing where things were falling short, or just kind of what challenges. So when we built Good Neighbors, it was something that could unite the whole city. And I think a lot of mutual aid groups were very focused on kind of pods and like small neighborhoods. But for a 311 system or a 211 system, or some of these other partners that are using us and really relying on us, it's a lot easier for them to have like a universal platform that now we have the entire greater Boston metro area covered. You can just go to one place, and within, on average, in 10 minutes, we'll connect a requester to a volunteer that can fulfill their request. That's also been background checked. So we tried to kind of fill gaps and kind of support and understand what the ecosystem was already, how the ecosystem was already responding, and what our kind of contribution could be in relation to that.
Yeah, no, that, I love this whole trial and error, and then just, seeing where the opportunities are, because it does very much so feel like during this time, it's not like this has been done before. There's not a model. There's some models that are for similar things in the past, but it's a lot of trying to find lots of things. And so actually, I'm sure like you've also probably faced failures, or, major challenges. I'd love for you to, and whoever, we can go in order as you like, but what's like an example of a challenge or a failure that you've had, and would love for you to talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, I can actually riff a little bit off of the like finding new models to do things as a challenge that we've had in most of the projects I've had, particularly the open standard respirator. The open is because we want to make this as open source as possible. The goal is to get it in as many hands as possible safely, with an industrial version to start with, considering in the future ones that are certified for medical use environments, but that's not our immediate target and not something that we have. But doing an open source, like what could be a medical device, is unheard of. It's not a thing that anyone's ever done before, but it's something that we all on the team are really want to try and figure out as best as we can. How do we get this design so that it can be safely manufactured to a specification that's, who sets what standards, who's the device originator in the eyes of the FDA, where does the liability fall, who's going to make sure that there's adverse event reporting if anything ever went wrong and would report that to the FDA, who's got design controls on their system, like who maintains the quality management system and make sure that the products are continuously made like that. Things that have changed a lot in that space and that continue to evolve. So things I'm seeing now, or have said before, aren't necessarily true one day to the next because of the FDA's guidance and the CDC's guidance on masks. So for a long time, we were having trouble getting N95s, and the KN95 standard in China was not accepted as an acceptable mask to import to the United States and sell medically. But and they go back and forth on that. So I guess from what I can tell. So there's never even really clear guidance necessarily. It requires a law degree to read all of their legislation and things like that. And they've tried to make it as accessible as possible for manufacturers to jump in and start making stuff because we're in such a shortage. But it's never really as easy as I think they hope. So we've been working with regulatory affairs folks to try and figure out what the best approach forward is and how to deal with this, as well as creating a 501c3 for our organization to hold the license. It's something that we're exploring, and how we get funding for the tools and who would own the tool. And we're working with a lot of manufacturers who are really interested in helping out. Ones that normally do prototype parts or do parts that for something completely different, that are just looking to pitch in with this effort and help, pitch in for the COVID kind of materials. And figuring out how to pair those organizations that might have interest in doing a medical sort of product and proceeding with getting an EUA and getting them in the right place, as well as figuring out how to, what size tool do we make, how immediately do we need to make demand, because there's all kinds of considerations for that, and how you proceed and what your product build strategy is. So those are some big areas. The other part we've had a lot of challenge on is the supply of the filter material was something that this was optimized for. So the reason why it's so kind of large in the front, this is an early prototype, this is a later one, is that we don't have any folds in the filter because we want the filter to be really easy to produce. So if you have a roll of the filter material, it just needs to be cut into a circle and put in here. So it has that surface area, but many filters will be folded like a car filter to increase the area, but not make it so large. But finding a filter material, we had a really great filter material at one point that we were doing some preliminary testing, really liked, and then the DoD came and bought out the whole supply of it. So that just becomes, business as usual. So trying to find, have the right funding to buy the quantity of filter material that we need so that we can get these in those hands. I'm glad that the material found a good purpose, but it does make our job a little harder to, get this right.
Never, but I feel like, MIT alums love these challenges.
Yeah, I was gonna say, love all the challenges. Certainly we had no shortage of them either, Wendy. So I would say the first one was supply and demand. So we did a brief survey that said, what is the kind of expertise that you're looking for? And then we went out to the volunteers and said, who wants to volunteer? And so at first we had a ton of the IT managed services and support folks come in and volunteer, and we really needed them. Families needed them. We also partnered with the Rhode Island Department of Education to take their overflow of requests for families. but then people also wanted to get into e-commerce, and now we have over 50% of our folks wanting to talk through digital transformation and e-commerce. And so I had to actually go out and recruit and just onboard some more volunteers that do e-commerce. And a lot of those technology folks were organizations were already super busy. And yet they were generous. I think everybody, most people that I talked to said, yeah, I'll volunteer a couple hours. So that was really amazing. I would say a second thing I mentioned is, and I think probably all of us are guilty of this, is taking a step back and realizing that this is mentally really difficult, that there is a lot of anxiety in the air, and just to give space in our interactions to say, hey, how are you doing? How's your family? Is everyone okay? Because I find with these Zoom calls, you just get right into business and you forget to be human. And so that's a challenge. And we talk about that a lot as well. Just check in with each other on our stand-ups. So I think that's a learning. And even within that small kind of volunteer core, we've had people hit, where they're going to say, I'm going to go in for testing today. I don't feel well. And we're lucky. Most of those folks have come out of the hospital, and so, but we're all going to be affected. I think we're all affected in that way. The third would be, and I think Stephanie, you alluded to this too, is the ongoing changing guidelines, evolving new, sources of revenue or diminishing sources of revenue and funding for these things for the businesses. So as guidelines are coming up, you get new calls that say, okay, I'm ready to do contactless payments. Or, new guidelines on how restaurants are opening. We've opened up restaurants in Rhode Island, and just making sure that we're on top of all of those guidelines is a challenge. So as that's happened, and as we have evolved and continue to test, something else we don't always allow ourselves time for is to think strategically. So actually just for the last 2 weeks, I felt like I really needed to take time to step back and say, okay, we're entering this time when we should think a little bit more about what the new normal is going to be. All of the work that I've heard about today, has an effect longer term, and an opportunity to make us more resilient, an opportunity to make our efforts long term. And so this is an ongoing challenge right now. I would suggest that we all individually and in our organizations take the time to think a little strategically and help each other out in that way as well. Yeah.
No, it's challenging. It sounds like all of you are having, there's so many different things that are coming your way. You have to pivot over and over again. But it sounds like, you're all doing it. And I don't know, you're about to speak as well, but, I'd love to kind of, for my next question, and by the way, if you have questions, please feel free to type in the Q&A. I do want to just kind of start thinking about, okay, what are some of your advice for adapting to this fast change too? But anyway, I'll let Noelle go with some of the biggest challenges or failures that you confronted during this time.
Yeah, so I think in the response, we wanted to get a product out as quickly as we could. So just really what was the basic, what were the basic functionalities that we needed. And then as, once we got that out, then we started to add additional features and understand kind of how people were really using it. So one challenge, it was also around kind of what our own team capacity looked like. So we have one social worker on our team who's like our customer support person. And initially people were getting matched, volunteers were signing up, they were getting matched, which was just miraculous. And but then they weren't letting us know that they had confirmed. There was a button they could press to let us know that they had confirmed, but our customer support person, our social worker, had to call, was like calling every volunteer who accepted to say, hey, did you do this? Did you do this? So that was one just technical thing that we were trying to figure out. Like, we only had one person on the team. They were, we also realized that so many seniors were using the service, and even though we made the site in 80, available in 80 languages, it was a very simple form, it was mobile friendly, everything we could do to think about accessibility, still about a third of the users were calling in to put in their requests over the phone. So even though it was super accessible, there were still people that didn't feel either didn't have access to technology or didn't feel comfortable using it. So we needed to preserve that time for our social worker to be able to answer those calls. So we figured out a different way. We created an automatic SMS 24 hours after a volunteer accepted the request to say, hey, have you finished, have you completed this request? Press this button. So that reduced the amount of time that, our social worker needed to spend in tracking down when things were completed. Another kind of just nice kind of pivot that we had to go through, one was language preferences. So as the word got out to more and more people, we started getting requests from families who were primarily Spanish speaking or Portuguese speaking, and actually English was not their first language. So we built in an algorithm that first we would match volunteers that spoke those languages with the right recipient. But that was something that took, it was a couple weeks until we really got to that, and until we reached this population that was kind of more isolated and disconnected from other services. And the final kind of pivot that we've made, and I'm sure we'll continue to make them as we learn more, is this was originally set up as paid deliveries. So it's people that could reimburse for whatever groceries or supplies were being picked up, or free phone call, like check-in phone call. How are you doing? How's your family doing? Which is such a good reminder that everyone needs that, not just seniors and not just people that can't go to, have trouble going to a grocery store. Everyone needs that sort of check-in. So, but we found that by partnering with the Partners in Health Tracing Collaborative in Massachusetts, had heard about us somehow, and probably through the mayor, and they're calling all these people that are COVID positive, and then calling everyone that they had interacted with in the last 2 weeks. And they were coming across a lot of these families that were facing food insecurity. And so we went to primarily doing paid deliveries and really having that as the only option. And now majority of our deliveries are actually for food banks and for free food pickups. And we've kind of had to just pivot the platform, and things have changed a little bit, but it's really great that we're also able to address this food insecurity issue through the platform, and that there's volunteers who are willing to do that. And yeah, we're really, really happy we can pivot that way. And I think, sadly, this is something that it's going to continue, that food banks are going to continue to have a lot of pressure on them. And it's great when there's, Meals on Wheels and there's more organized systems. But I think what we found is that everyone's doing their best, and there's still these gaps. So if we can create tools and systems that can fill in those gaps, there's value, and there's people that will use it.
Thank you so much. And it seems like there's like a consistent theme across all of you about, there's things are changing all the time, and some of the hypotheses that you've had may not be the case, but also there's this wave of partnerships that are coming in because everyone's trying to figure out how to help. So I'm curious to hear from you, like on that note, when you are going through this rapid change all the time, and this inundation of requests from both the demand and supply. I'm curious to hear, like, what are some of the ways that you're able to, or what's some advice that you would give to someone who's facing a similar situation?
We can't keep going in order. If you guys have better answers, though, I'm more than happy to share the floor. I'd say my level of advice is with especially teams that are disconnected, having some kind of process for information. We're kind of going through a lot of those right now in both the teams of figuring out how to store information so that it's accessible when people need it, where they need it. So we've used Google Drive and other tools like that a lot to organize information, and like tracking partnerships. Like, we're not going to go out and buy Salesforce. It doesn't make sense for this. Unless anyone's going to give us free Salesforce, let me know. But it doesn't make sense for either organization, for example, and managing those incoming leads is hard. So even just simple spreadsheets that anyone can access from any device is something, a way to keep track of who's talking to who and what the current state of information is. There's a lot of probably more, since you guys have so many more touch points with your partners, I'm sure you guys have some really good answers for this. Ours are, mostly talking to big organizations or people that are working in specific labs. So we can kind of group that way. And the touch points are like phone calls, emails, and stuff like that. Maybe some files sent back and forth. But I'd love to hear how you guys are managing all of that as well.
I love that question, Steph. We've been using Google Drive and spreadsheets and the forms as much as possible, just because it's also easy to change process. With that, it's not like I have to rewrite a database table when the process changes. So Google Spreadsheets is great for prototyping. I also wanted to say something about Noelle's accessibility piece, because we definitely wanted to be as accessible and as inclusive as possible, especially with the underserved and minority populations. So we asked specifically for volunteers and translation services. So we have two things. One is that the volunteers are native speakers, and if not, that we have volunteers that are willing to come onto a session and translate. And it's in our outreach. So we've been doing outreach. We've tried to go to the minority associations as well to make sure that they know about this, about our program and service, because they often feel, I know, left out, and that this is some sort of, other or privileged program. So we definitely don't want them to feel that way, and have made an effort to reach out to them. So I thought that was a really good point, Noelle. And then Wendy, I think that a big piece of advice when you talk about partnership is knowing what you're good at and knowing what other people are good at, and asking. So I think I've met so many amazing people, and just people's willingness to be super upfront with, like, I do this well, I don't do this well. That works for me, it doesn't work for me, I think has made it easier to get things done quickly. Be generous with your gifts and as well as your struggles, like we're all in this together. So if something's really not working for you, it's okay to say it's not, and don't go for perfect. I feel like there's this there's this big piece of me that always wants things to be like a new product introduction. These experiments have not been new product introductions. So, for the first time, like this week, I was like, okay, I want a cut over on this using this form. Like, let's everybody test it and then we'll cut over. But that hasn't happened the last 6 weeks. We've just been like, okay, go. So be prepared to learn and pivot, but don't go for perfect. Yeah. Noelle, is that, I think we have a little bit more. I'd be interested in the kind of the volunteer aspect and communication that Steph started. Anything on that?
Yeah, we, with recruiting volunteers or just managing the volunteers, I think what we've done is we've really tried to we've built something that's not very invasive for volunteers. So it's different because we're kind of in terms of our team collaboration, we're a very small team, so it's been fairly easy to kind of stay on the same page and coordinate. And then with volunteers, they just get added to this list, and they get text messages from us if there's, you know, a request in their vicinity that someone hasn't accepted already before them. So we try to really, we might think about other ways to kind of engage people, but for now, it's really, they don't get kind of bombarded by messages from us. It's just like, you know, we're sending 5 or 10 for every request. As soon as someone accepts it, then it moves forward. And what was I going to add? Oh, one, I think just for advice. So we've had a lot of, you know, when you look backwards, you're like, oh, it worked out pretty well. Like everything's going, we're moving ahead. We've been able to help these people or do this. But in that moment, when you're figuring it out, it's really a blank canvas and you could go in any direction, and you can spend your time in any way you want. And one thing looking back that's been really helpful is I've thought about past mentors and past conversations I had with people, and reached out to people I haven't talked to in a year or 2 years. Maybe I only had one conversation, but I thought that they might have perspective or advice or relationships that could help me figure out how to map all of this together. And everybody has responded within minutes practically. I mean, you know, if you say that you're thinking about a way that you want to help and you have some ideas and you just want to brainstorm with someone, people that you barely know, maybe, you know, even cold emails, you know, are really, I found them to be really effective. And those conversations have been really valuable because there's lots of people in past lives that have done really interesting work that might have parallels to what you're thinking about. And they have the time, you know, some of them really do have the time, or they're willing to put in extra time to just have a conversation with you and make introductions or give you their ideas. And that's been really, really valuable for me. To get to lean on other people and brainstorm. So I recommend, if there's anyone you think of that you think could be helpful, you should just reach out to them and set up some time.
That's great, because actually answer my questions. You all talked about it. How do you recruit volunteers? You answered that throughout. You know, for our staff, you know, there's the whole group on Slack with the helpful engineering, and then also, you know, reaching out to people with different expertise in different engineering. For Suli, it's, you know, kind of, there's a lot of inflow of volunteers, but also, you know, like when you ask for help, there's a lot of people who are coming to you, because I think everyone's trying to figure out how to solve this problem. Similarly for Noelle, like you're reaching out to people who have these expertise areas. So then I guess instead of asking that question, since you already answered it, you know, what are some of the areas that you need help with right now?
I'd say in general on our end, we are always looking for people with legal help on different items. Like we've been lucky enough to be able to partner with some law firms doing pro bono work, but especially ones with like regulatory experience. Like that is critical to our success, and you know, we're open to that kind of help or interest in those areas, especially device related. In other areas like logistics and sales, to like make sure that we're managing relationships with the people that we're serving on like in these bigger organizations. People, you know, instead of, you know, managing them through text messages, things like account managers make more sense. And so that sort of stuff is always helpful. Even if, you know, it sounds like, you know, the projects that I'm working on like those are just critical functions, for example, that you might not think of when you think of the core product offering, but are critical to the business.
Yeah, so this is really a Rhode Island-wide effort. So we are looking for ideas. If you have ideas for small businesses, we would like to volunteer time. We've actually had volunteers from outside of the state helping state because the entire program is all on Zoom. So small businesses are not coming into a physical space. We could use volunteers always. And yeah, I'm open to ideas. I mean, as well for these small businesses. I've found people have been very creative. and always funding. I would, so I think that all of us are looking or will soon look at some of these programs being viable long term. So thinking about what that would cost to keep going. All of us are serving some of the most vulnerable needs. And so I think that I don't think we necessarily want to go back to what we were doing before. I think the new normal has an opportunity to be different and amazing. So we're all making that happen.
Great. Yeah, I think everything is working really well in Boston now. If you live in Boston and you want to volunteer, or you live in Boston and you know someone who could use help with groceries, with food banks, with social support, you can send them to nesterlygoodneighbors.com. And then now what I'm working on today is connecting with other mayors and offering this tool to them, basically almost for free. They just have to cover background checks and a little bit of admin costs, but really affordably trying to get it out to other cities and finding, so we're any introductions to mayors are helpful. If you know any mayors,
I'll give you a call, Noelle.
Okay, great. Perfect. I have one mayor here. And then we're also looking to connect with larger foundations who could be interested in kind of funding, the background checks and the basic overhead to scale this to other cities as well. Because I know that cities have a lot of pressure. They're trying to do a lot of things at once. So if a funder can help cover background checks for volunteers, and then we can roll this out, we have something that works, and if it can help other communities, we want to share it with them.
Wendy, if I could just follow up maybe on what I said and be a little bit more clear. I think when I say I'm looking for ideas, we're actually starting to focus on industry specific ideas now. So if you're out there and you serve a specific industry like restaurants or garden centers, we're looking at how can we affect, not just in Rhode Island, but do experimentations around small businesses in industry-wide. So I'd be happy to make connections in that way and do experiments. Thank you.
Thank you. And we got 2 more minutes left. This has been such an exciting conversation. But what would you like to say to alums who are trying to figure out how to give in their own ways, if you were to leave them with one thought?
Go for it. Just go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing. Do it. If you need ideas, call us.
Yeah, even just checking in on folks that are helping and seeing if they know folks that, there's a big network of people looking to help right now, who, I get requests from other groups trying to build different devices, for example, for my time. If you're interested in even just consulting and giving it, ideas, or having a conversation based on your area of expertise or people that you know, or even just connecting those people with people that you might know. That's really, really helpful. A lot of this is, work that people are doing, not because they're getting paid or, going to get rich off of anything. They're just looking to help as many people as possible and help you succeed in your mission. So.
And know what you like to do, right, Stephanie? So, whatever you like to do in your spare time. If it's sewing, there's nonprofits and groups that are making masks. If you like, if you have a 3D printer, find the open source and the groups that are, making face shields. If you love cooking, there's people that are, so it really is very much about knowing yourself and getting yourself out there and going for it.
Yeah, and just don't be afraid that if you reach out and that you're going to get rejected or that you're not going to be able to help out in some way, like, it might not be the right avenue, but even that conversation several weeks later or months later can come back and find, like, once they hear something that matches with you. And there's just so many ways to help that, whatever your skills are, I'm positive you can make a difference.
Well, thank you all so much. This has been such an amazing panel. I'm so inspired every time. And thanks for everyone who tuned in via Zoom and via Facebook Live. Definitely, I'm excited, certainly, and I think I can say for all of us, I'm excited to see all of what you will do and how you'll be helping throughout. And I just like Q&A. Oh, thanks so much. Very inspiring from Rich. So, right. Thank you very much, all. And like I mentioned, if you're looking for more events to attend, the MIT Club of Northern California has opened all the events online to all MIT alums as well as non-alums. So if you're a club member, the events are all free. If you're not, if you're with another MIT club, you can ask your club lead. There's a discount code for you. So, all right, see you all in another session. And thanks for joining me and giving a round of virtual applause to our amazing speakers.
Yes, it's been a pleasure to chat with all of you. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much, MIT Club of Northern California.
Thank you all.
Bye.